I woke up with a metallic taste in my mouth and the absolute certainty that the night before wasn't just a dream. My name is Laura Bennett. I'm 29. A high school teacher in a small town near Flagstaff. I never believed in stories of abductions. I laughed at them. Until the night everything changed. It started with a low vibrating hum that shook the walls and pinned me to the bed. Outside the window, the desert sky lit up in an unnatural glow. Not the moon, not an aircraft. My older sister Claire ran into my room trembling. She whispered that the sound was inside her head. And then the memories splinter. One moment we were together in the doorway, the next I was flat on a surface that pulsed with cold light. The walls curved endlessly with no shadows. Figures surrounded me, impossibly tall with eyes that seemed to look straight through me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The only thing I felt was a wave of voices pressing into my thoughts. When I woke, it was 6 a.m. Sharp, Claire swore I'd vanished in front of her and reappeared without warning. She refused to speak more, but her face carried the kind of fear that doesn't fade. I told myself it was a nightmare, a trick of the mind, yet the faint glowing mark on my shoulder stayed for hours, pulsing like it was alive, and that was only the beginning. I tried to go to work the next morning like nothing had happened, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking when I held the steering wheel. Every face in the hallway at school looked blurred and distant, as if I was still half asleep. By lunchtime, I could hear a faint ringing that nobody else seemed to notice, a pitch so high it made my teeth ache. Claire texted me that she hadn't slept at all. She kept saying she saw a flash of light over our backyard at exactly 3:30. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because when I rolled up my sleeve, the mark on my shoulder had spread slightly, the edges darker and raised as if burned into my skin. It ached when I pressed it, and the heat lingered long after. That night, I sat on the porch alone, staring at the dark horizon, waiting for another sound. The air felt charged, like a storm without clouds, and for a moment I thought I heard my name whispered from somewhere above, but when I looked up there was only empty sky and the hum starting again, somewhere far off and closer every second. I stood up without realizing it, my body tense like I was bracing for impact. The hum grew heavier, pressing on my chest until I could barely breathe, and then it cut off, leaving only silence too sharp to be natural. Claire opened the door behind me, her face pale in the porch light. She asked if I heard it too, but before I could answer, we both noticed the neighbor's dog barking frantically at the sky, spinning in circles as if something hovered above us. I wanted to run back inside, lock every door and window, but instead I found myself stepping off the porch into the yard, drawn by something I couldn't see. The desert air was still and heavy, and every instinct screamed at me to stop, but my feet carried me forward anyway. The ground felt unsteady under my feet, as though the dirt itself was vibrating, a low pulse that rose through my legs into my chest. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but when I looked at the screen, it was blank. No signal, no time, no icons, only a faint glow, like it was turned on, but empty. Claire called my name once, then twice, and then she went silent. I turned back and she wasn't on the porch anymore, just the open door swaying slightly like someone had brushed past it a moment ago. I froze, scanning the yard, the road, the dark line of the trees, but everything was still except for that invisible pressure pressing down on me and a flicker of pale light at the edge of the field behind our house, growing brighter with every second. I stepped toward the field, my breath shallow each footfall, sounding too loud against the hush. The light wasn't steady. It pulsed like a heartbeat spilling over the grass in soft blue waves. When I reached the fence, I stopped gripping the wood so hard, it bit into my palms on the other side of the field. Something like a mist hung low to the ground, but it moved against the wind, curling and folding as if aware of me. I called Claire's name. My voice thin and breaking. The mist shifted, then a shape flickered inside it, tall, narrow, indistinct, but definitely there. My pulse hammered in my ears, and for a second, I thought it was moving toward me before the light dimmed, flickered out, and the field fell dark, leaving me staring at nothing, unsure if I had just seen it at all. I climbed over the fence before I had time to question myself, the wood scraping my palms as I dropped into the field. The air smelled sharp, metallic like wires burning, though nothing was there. The grass under my shoes seemed colder than the night around it, and the silence pressed into my ears until even my own breathing sounded too loud. I called Claire again, but the name died in my throat because the mist rose higher, drifting apart to reveal not one shape, but several, motionless, almost blending with the darkness, their outlines bending in and out of focus as if the night itself didn't want me to see them clearly. I froze, torn between running and stepping closer, and in that hesitation I felt it again, that hum, low and steady, not in the air this time, but inside my chest. I tried to back away, but my legs felt unsteady, like the ground had tilted under me. The figures didn't move yet. The space between us kept shrinking, as if the field itself was closing in. My phone vibrated again in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen was still blank. Glowing faintly like a dying light bulb, I shoved it back and turned to run, but there was no fence behind me, only the same field stretching on in every direction, the porch lights from the house gone, the trees gone, just an endless open plain under a black sky, and somewhere in that dark, a single thin beam of white light rose straight up as if marking a place waiting for me. I started walking toward that thin beam because there was nowhere else to go. My steps slow and heavy, the grass brushing against my knees. Though I didn't remember it ever being that tall, the closer I got, the colder the air felt, until my breath came out in pale streams like Winter Claire's voice called my name once, sharp and clear from somewhere ahead. Then silence again. I reached out in front of me, and my hand disappeared into the light as if it wasn't touching anything at all. Only empty space, humming like a wire under tension for a second. I thought I saw movement inside the beam, shadows flickering back and forth like someone pacing just out of sight, and then the ground shifted under my feet and I felt myself leaning forward as though something was pulling me in. I tried to pull back, but my arm stayed inside the beam like it was caught in thick water, my fingers tingling and numb. The hum rose in pitch, vibrating through my ribs, my heart hammering so hard it blurred my vision. I called Claire again, but the sound came out flat, swallowed before it left my mouth. The field around me dimmed, as if the light was draining color from everything, and the beam widened just enough to surround my chest, my head spinning with the sense of being watched, though nothing stood there. The last thing I saw before my eyes shut was a faint outline moving toward me inside the beam, taller than any person, and then only weightlessness and a sound like air rushing past my ears, growing louder until it was all I could hear. When the sound stopped, it was like someone had cut a switch, and the silence hit so hard. My ears rang. I opened my eyes expecting darkness, but everything around me glowed dimly like the inside of a seashell, curved walls, no corners, faint lines of light running along the surface. I was standing, not lying, but the floor felt soft and unsteady under my shoes, as if it shifted with each breath I took. There was no door, no window, only that glow and a low vibration under my feet. I called for Claire again, my voice bouncing back at me, thin and strange like it belonged to someone else. Then from the far side of the room, a shadow peeled away from the wall and began moving slowly toward me, tall, narrow, silent, its face still hidden. It stopped just a few steps from me, the glow behind it making the outline blur. I could see hands, but not fingers, shoulders, but no edges, like it was wrapped in a thin layer of air that bent the light. Its head tilted slightly as if studying me, and for a moment the vibration under my feet rose higher, pressing into my chest until my heartbeat matched it. I tried to speak, but my throat locked. The mark on my shoulder burned faintly under my shirt, not glowing, just hot like a bruise touched by ice. The shape raised one arm, slow, deliberate, and something in the wall behind it opened soundlessly, a vertical slit of darker space that looked less like a door and more like the absence of anything. And then it turned its head toward the opening, as if waiting for me to follow. I stood frozen, staring at that dark opening, my back against the curved wall, the air inside the room thicker now, like breathing through cloth. The figure didn't move any closer, it only shifted its weight slightly, the way someone might step aside at a doorway. Its head tilted toward the gap again, an invitation or a warning. I couldn't tell. My pulse thudded in my temples, and every instinct told me to stay put. But the vibration under my feet had changed into a slow pull, forward, subtle but constant, drawing me one small step at a time, until my toes touched the edge of the opening. The space beyond was black, no floor, no ceiling, only a faint smell of cold metal and rain, and somewhere deep inside it a flicker of light, moving like a distant flame. I lifted my arm and pressed it against the wall, trying to stop myself from stepping forward, but the surface gave slightly beneath my hand, warm and alive, almost like skin. The pull from the opening grew stronger, and before I realized it, my other foot had crossed the threshold. The floor under me shifted hard, like stepping onto glass that bent without breaking. The blackness swallowed me, and for a second I couldn't tell if I was moving or if the space itself was carrying me forward behind me. The slit closed without a sound, cutting off the room and the figure with it. I reached out in the dark, and my fingers brushed against something smooth, cold, and rigid like a railing. I grabbed it tight and followed it blindly, the faint flame ahead now sharper, brighter, and with each step I realized it wasn't fire at all, but a cluster of lights pulsing in rhythm, as if they were alive and waiting. I tightened my grip on the railing and moved faster, the cold biting into my palms, the pulsing lights ahead growing larger and separating into rows on either side of a narrow path like a landing strip guiding me forward. The floor beneath my feet, solid now, metal panels faintly vibrating with each pulse. I risked a glance behind me, but there was nothing. Only darkness pressing close. I kept walking until the path opened into a wider chamber. The ceiling high and curved, lit by hundreds of those pale lights like stars, frozen in place. In the center stood a table or platform, smooth and silver, waist-high, with faint symbols etched across its surface. My heart slammed against my ribs, but my legs carried me closer until I was standing right next to it, and before I could pull back, the surface rippled once like liquid, and a faint shape began to rise from underneath it. The surface pushed upward, forming a clear dome, and inside it something small lay, curled, almost human in outline, but thinner, fragile, its skin pale and translucent, veins visible beneath the surface. I staggered back, my heel catching the edge of the platform, but I couldn't look away. The figure inside twitched once as if reacting to my presence, its eyelids fluttering, though no breath moved its chest. The symbols around the dome lit up one by one, in a slow sequence, casting shadows across the chamber. I reached out without thinking, my fingertips hovering just above the glass, and the moment I did, the eyelids snapped open, revealing eyes black and endless fixed directly on me. I felt my knees buckle and the room tilted sideways before everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in my own bed, the sheets damp with sweat, the clock on my nightstand frozen at exactly 6 a.m. My throat dry, my body aching as if I'd run miles. Claire burst into the room the second she heard me stir, her face pale. She swore I'd been gone for hours, that she'd searched every inch of the house and the yard, but I had simply vanished. I tried to argue, but the dirt caked on my shoes, and the faint circular bruise still burning on my shoulder made silence the only answer I could give. Outside the window, the desert looked unchanged, ordinary, almost peaceful. Yet the air carried that same charged stillness, like the night hadn't ended at all, and something was waiting to begin again. Claire hovered near the door, watching me like I might disappear again. I forced myself out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom. The mirror showed a face I barely recognized. Eyes bloodshot, skin pale, and that bruise on my shoulder darker than before, shaped like a perfect circle. I pressed it hard, but no pain came, only a strange numbness spreading outward into my arm. Claire asked what happened. I couldn't answer because every time I tried to remember the chamber, the lights, the thing in the dome, my head throbbed with a pressure that made me nauseous. I splashed cold water on my face, but when I looked up again, the mirror flickered for a fraction of a second, showing not my reflection, but a faint outline standing behind me, tall, narrow, motionless, and when I spun around, the bathroom was empty. I backed out of the bathroom slowly, my hand gripping the door frame. Claire saw my face and stopped mid-sentence, her eyes flicking to the empty hallway as if she'd felt it too. I told her we had to leave the house, but my voice sounded wrong, thin, like it was coming from somewhere else. We grabbed our coats and stepped outside into the early light. The street completely still, no cars, no birds, even the wind absent, like the world was holding its breath. I turned to lock the door, but the key in my hand was warm, almost soft, and for a moment it didn't look like metal at all, but something pale and smooth that pulsed once between my fingers, then hardened again. I dropped it onto the porch, and it clattered like normal metal, but the sound echoed far longer than it should have, and in that echo I heard a low hum starting again from somewhere out over the desert. We got into the car without speaking. I turned the key and the engine caught, rough at first, then steady. I drove fast out of the neighborhood, the road stretching empty for miles, the hum in the air fading little by little. The farther we went, neither of us dared to look back. The desert passed in long silent stretches, broken only by the sound of tires on asphalt. It felt endless, but after what must have been an hour, the glow behind us was gone, replaced by ordinary daylight. Finally, I saw a small roadside cafe with a flickering sign. We pulled in, parked, and just sat there for a moment, breathing like we had surfaced from underwater. Then without a word, we went inside, the smell of coffee and frying bacon hitting us sharp and real, so normal it almost hurt. We stayed in that cafe for hours, neither of us saying much, just staring out the window while the sound of plates and voices around us made everything feel almost normal. The longer we sat there, the more the weight of the night seemed to loosen its grip. By early afternoon, we finally gathered ourselves, paid the bill, and got back in the car. The drive home felt endless but uneventful. The sky bright, the desert ordinary. No lights, no hum, just road stretching out until we reached our neighborhood. For the next few days we lived carefully, keeping to routines like nothing had happened. Work, school, Grocery runs, the things that made up an ordinary life, the mark on my shoulder slowly faded to a faint bruise. Claire stopped bringing up what she swore she saw, and I forced myself not to ask. Yet sometimes late at night, I would wake to silence so sharp it felt unnatural. Listening to the air holding, still waiting for a sound I both dreaded and expected. Weeks passed and life settled into something that looked normal on the surface. I taught my classes, graded papers, stood in front of rows of restless teenagers pretending my hands weren't shaking. Claire went back to work too, though she always kept her phone close, her eyes flicking to the sky. If a plane passed overhead, people around us noticed nothing strange. No one mentioned the hum or the light. We tried to bury it beneath routine, but certain things wouldn't fade. The clocks in our house sometimes froze on 6 bars for a minute or two before ticking again. Radios cut to static without warning, and at night I still woke, gasping, convinced the silence outside wasn't silence at all, but something listening, waiting just beyond the edge of hearing. One evening I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the desert through the window and the clock on the wall, ticking steady as I listened for anything unusual. At midnight, the second hand seemed to stick on 6. My chest tightening as I leaned forward, but a moment later it clicked ahead like nothing was wrong. The air felt normal again. Another time I woke to the sound of static in my room, certain the radio had turned itself on, but when I checked it was silent, the dial untouched. In the morning on my way to work, I thought a car was following me for miles, headlights fixed in my mirror, but when I finally pulled over it just passed without slowing. Each time I told myself I was imagining it, and yet I kept watching, waiting for something that never came. Days turned into weeks, and the strange moments kept slipping through the edges of my routine. I'd reach for a glass on the kitchen counter and be sure I'd left it somewhere else. A faint vibration under my feet when I crossed the hallway, only to find the washing machine running downstairs, a streetlight flickering outside my window at night in perfect rhythm with my heartbeat, until I blinked and it steadied again. At school, I would call a student's name and feel for a second like the room had gone silent. Then the noise of pencils and whispers would rush back, and Claire caught me staring at nothing more than once, asking what was wrong, and I would shake my head because by the time I tried to explain, it all looked normal again. One afternoon, I stayed late at school grading papers, the halls already empty, the building quiet. I heard footsteps echoing from the far end, steady, measured, like someone walking slowly toward me. I called out, expecting the janitor, but no answer came. The sound kept closing in until it reached just outside my classroom door. I stood up, my heart racing, and pulled it open. The hallway was completely empty, lights humming faintly, the lockers lined in silence. I waited a long moment, staring down both directions, but nothing moved. I finally shut the door again, telling myself it was pipes or air vents. Yet when I looked back at my desk, all the papers I had stacked neatly were scattered across the floor, as if caught in a sudden gust of wind, though the windows were closed. I knelt down, gathering the papers, my hands shaking. But the more I looked, the more it seemed like I had just been careless. Maybe I'd knocked the stack over myself when I jumped up from the desk. The hallway noise, just old pipes groaning like always, I told myself. The mind plays tricks when you're tired and alone. I stacked the papers again, turned off the lights, and walked out to the parking lot. The night air calm, the sky clear and ordinary. By the time I started the car and pulled onto the road, it felt almost ridiculous that I'd thought anything was wrong at all. Eventually, days stacked neatly into weeks and life seemed steady again. The routines of teaching classes and grading papers gave shape to my time. Claire stopped asking questions and I stopped trying to explain. We cooked dinner, watched television, made plans like we always had. The mark on my shoulder faded to nothing, and I caught myself almost believing it had been only a dream. Sometimes a noise outside or a flicker in the lights pulled me back into that night, but nothing ever followed. No hum, no glow, only silence and the ordinary world holding firm. So I carried on, letting the strangeness slip into memory, living as if everything was normal again.